Julian Sterling stood at the podium, tapping his $50,000 Patek Philippe. He looked at the 500 guests, then glared at Avery in the back row. She wore a cheap black dress. To Julian, she was a cockroach. Legacy is about blood, Julian sneered into the mic, and some blood is just trash. He pointed a finger at Avery. The room went silent. Today, science will put this fraud back in the gutter where she belongs. Avery didn't move. Beside her, Elena Sterling leaned in. Her diamonds were bright, but her eyes were cold. The locks are already changed, Avery, Elena whispered. I had the staff burn your suitcases this morning. You were leaving this room with nothing. Barry felt a heavy hand on her back. Dominic Vance stepped out of the shadows. He didn't offer a romantic smile. He looked like a man about to snap a neck. The trap is set, Dominic growled in her ear. Watch him choke. Julian signaled the giant LED screen. This is the final DNA report, he shouted. He pressed the button. He expected a 99% match for himself. He expected Avery to be erased. Instead, the screen turned red. Authentication void and data tampering flashed in giant letters. Julian's grin froze. He slammed the button again and again. It's a glitch, he barked. He turned to the wings for his CTO, Miller. But Miller's chair was empty. The man Julian paid to lie was gone. Is the truth too heavy for you, Julian? Avery stood up. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. She walked toward the stage. Her heels clicked on the floor like a death march. You talked about blood. Let's talk about the samples you swapped at 3. The guests began to whisper. Julian staggered back against the podium. He was sweating now. You hacked it, he hissed. Security, get this bitch out of here. Dominic Vance stepped to the front. He tossed a thick gold folder onto the table. It hit the wood like a gavel. Security isn't coming for her, Julian, Dominic said. His voice was a low threat. They're waiting for the man who forged a legal document. Mr. Harrison read the real logs. The lawyer's hands shook as he opened the folder. The sample labeled Julian Sterling was traced with synthetic DNA 48 hours ago, Harrison announced. The override was authorized by Julian's own executive key. Julian's mouth hung open. He looked like a fish gasping for air. He turned to his mother, Alina, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring at that gold folder like it was a ticking bomb. It's a glitch, Julian screamed. His voice was thin and desperate. Avery bought Miller off. She's a thief. He lunged for the folder. Dominic didn't even break a sweat. He stepped in front of Julian. The movement was fast and terrifying. Julian hit Dominic's chest like he had run into a brick wall. Don't touch the evidence, Julian, Dominic growled. He looked at Julian like he was a piece of trash. You talk about thieves? Let's talk about the Silver Lake project. Julian froze. His face went gray. That's confidential, he hissed. The board approved that transfer to Vesper Holdings. It was a legal partnership. Avery stepped forward. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a predator. A partnership needs 2 people, Julian, she said. Her voice was ice cold. But Vesper Holdings isn't a company. It's a grave. And you're the one who dug it. She pulled a tablet from her clutch and tapped the screen. The giant LED changed again. It showed wire transfers. Hundreds of millions of dollars. All going from the Sterling accounts to a single shell company. You thought you were being clever, Avery said. She walked right into Julian's personal space. You sold the company's land rights to pay off your gambling debts in Macau. You thought you were hiding the money behind a dozen shell companies. She tapped the screen one last time. The owner of Vesper Holdings appeared in giant, bold letters. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a partner. The name was Avery Sterling. The room exploded in whispers. Julian staggered back. He hit the podium so hard it rattled. You bought it? He stuttered. I didn't just buy the land, Julian, Avery said. She smiled, but her eyes were dead. I bought the debt you used to leverage those deals. I bought the mortgage on this ballroom. I bought the very air in your lungs. You don't own that suit. You don't own that watch. You don't even own the name Sterling anymore. Dominic stepped up behind Avery. He put a heavy hand on her waist. He looked at Julian with pure disgust. Technically, Julian, you are trespassing on Avery's property right now, Dominic noted, and I don't like trespassers. Julian fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out a black titanium credit card. He threw it at Avery. Take it. Just stop this. Dominic caught the card in midair and snapped it in half. The account was closed 5 minutes ago, Dominic said. Real-time balance, 0. You're broke, Julian. You're a beggar in an expensive suit. Julian collapsed onto his knees. The floor was hard, but his world was softer. He looked at Alina. She wasn't the Queen of Sterling anymore. She was a ghost. She reached for the diamond necklace at her throat. Her fingers were shaking so hard she drew blood. Avery, let's be reasonable, Elena whispered. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. We're family. Everything I did was to protect the name. Your father was... He wasn't himself at the end. Avery stepped closer. She didn't show pity. She didn't show anger. She showed nothing. He wasn't himself because you were poisoning him, Elena, Avery said. The room went cold. She tapped the tablet. A medical log appeared on the big screen. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a death warrant. The nurse you tried to bribe, she kept a diary. Dominic found the pharmacy records you tried to burn. Elena didn't scream. She made a dry, rattling sound. She fell into her chair. Julian saw his last shield break. He roared and lunged at Avery. He wanted to kill her. He didn't get close. Dominic's hand closed around Julian's throat. It was fast. It was brutal. Dominic lifted Julian off the floor. Julian's expensive shoes kicked the air. You think you're a wolf? Dominic growled. His eyes were dark and empty. You're a tick, Julian, and the host is finished with you. Dominic dropped him. Julian hit the floor like a sack of trash. His watch shattered against the marble. The back doors swung open. 4 men in suits walked in. They had federal badges. They didn't look at the bar. They looked at Julian and Elena. Elena Sterling, Julian Sterling, the agent said. His voice was flat. You are under arrest for fraud, grand larceny, and the murder of Arthur Sterling. The guests didn't help. They turned their backs. They didn't want to be near losers. They scrambled for the exits. Julian's friends were gone in seconds. Wait, Julian shrieked as the guards grabbed him. Avery, I'm your brother. Avery didn't look. She watched the handcuffs click onto Elena's wrists. The sound was loud. The sound was final. Elena looked at Avery. She wanted to beg, but Avery's face was a stone wall. Take them through the service entrance, Avery ordered. I don't want their shadows on the front steps. Julian's shoes made a screeching sound on the floor. He screamed for his lawyers. He screamed for mercy. Then the heavy service door slammed shut. The silence was total. The ballroom was a mess of empty glasses and broken dreams. Avery stood in the center of it all. She felt Dominic step up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist.
Is it enough? Dominic asked. He pressed his face into her neck.
Avery looked at the broken pieces of Julian's watch. She thought about the attic. She thought about the 10 years of hunger. She leaned back into Dominic's chest. No, Avery whispered. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. Now we begin the real work. Dominic turned her around. He gripped her chin. He didn't say he loved her. He didn't have to. The city is waiting for its new queen, he said. Don't keep them waiting. Avery took his hand. They walked toward the light of the balcony. Behind them, the Sterling past stayed in the dark.
Seeing Julian, the man obsessed with his noble bloodline, drop to his knees in a suit he doesn't even own anymore, is the kind of poetic justice that truly fuels my soul. But it makes you wonder, after a decade of hunger and betrayal, is Avery's cold-blooded takeover a justified victory, or has she just become a more dangerous version of the family she destroyed? Between us, I originally planned for Avery to show a sliver of mercy. But once I wrote the part about Elena poisoning the father, I knew I had to let Avery go full predator. Would you like me to adjust the tone to be even more cynical, or should we move on to the next story segment?